So without further ado, we're going to give the class over to Jyotirmoy uncle, who's graciously given us his time to speak about Prabhu. Now, last week, Shamal uncle gave us a brief introduction about Prabhu, which most of us in this group probably have some familiarity, as our parents might be housed under the saint. But if not, nonetheless, as we've spoken about many of the great spiritual leaders throughout the year, he is no different. So give him your undivided attention. Have your questions written down. I'm sure Uncle will ask you for questions at the end, and we can address them later. Okay, so with that, Jyotirmoy uncle, the class is all yours.
It's a very difficult task, to introduce you to Prabhu Jagatbandhu Sundar. His life is so vast and there are so many things to talk about and the time is very short. So I'm not very sure whether I'll be able to do justice to the task which I have been given, but I'll try my best, and of course will depend on the grace of Prabhu. And I'm not much used to, talking to kids, because mostly we are talking in the forums of our devotees. So maybe at times I'll speak in language which may not be very much, in tune with what you hear, but kindly bear with me. And of course, I being from India, my accent and English will be Indian. So you have to pardon that also. In this picture, we can see, this picture is typically called in Mahanam Sampradaya. That is the Sampradaya where we worship Prabhu as our deity. It's called Braja Lila, Gaur Lila, Mahashanmilan. Means this gives basically a definition of Prabhu Jagatbandhu Sundar. Who is he? First, before we go into his life, we have to know who is he. So this shows who is he. Braja Lila, that is, you can see the Lord Krishna, Radharani, when they unite, they become Lord Gauranga, the brilliant one. Lord Gauranga again, and his companions, Lord Nityananda, Lord Gadadhar, etc. And when they all unite, that united form is called Prabhu Jagatbandhu Sundar. Or that means inside Prabhu, the whole of Vrindavan and the whole of Navadvip, all the worshipped deities are there. He's a combination of all. He said in his own language, the Leela combination of all things. Prabhu himself, he revealed his, identity to one of his very close companion, Navadvip Dasji, who is worshipped as one of the topmost gurus in Mahanam Sampradaya. Dr. Mahanamrita Brahmacharis and his Gurudev, Sripad Mahendraji, used to worship him as a guide and one of the gurus. So that Navadvip Dasji once, when he was traveling with Prabhu, then Prabhu revealed, suddenly, Prabhu revealed to him his identity and said, I am Lord Gauranga and I am Lord Sri Krishna together in one body, and Leela combination of all things. All the Leelas and all the Leela companions in both Vrindavan and Navadvip are within me. That's what he said. So that's what we can see in this picture. And thereby, if he is Lord Krishna and Lord Gauranga together, he is definitely the Almighty God. And how we can accept him as the Almighty, the God, God of the gods, the ultimate. So we are his devotees, we can always tell him to be the God himself. But there must be certain logic by which we have to establish, we have to logically understand from the scriptures why he is God himself. Again, before we go into his life, we have to know about little bit about his theory, or as I said, the background by which we worship him in the Mahanam Sampradaya as the ultimate worshipable object. In our scriptures, that is the Sanatana Dharma scriptures, the definition of God, the supreme Godhead rather, the God of the God, who is the creator. You know, here the gods means the devatas like Indra, Varuna, Lord Shiva, Lord Vishnu, Lord Brahma. They're all gods. But Lord Krishna is not that. Lord Gauranga is not that. Prabhu Jagatbandhu is not that. They are the ultimate creator, even the creators of the gods, God of the gods, the supreme Godhead, they are called in the scripture. Param Brahma, Bhagavan. So, the definition of Bhagavan or Parabrahma in our scriptures is Sat Chit Ananda. Lord Almighty is Sat, is Chit, and he is Ananda. So let us understand what is Sat Chit Ananda. There are three words, Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Sat means existence, the physical form. So whenever God comes into this world, his physical form or the existence is very, very beautiful. Lord Krishna was very beautiful. Lord Gauranga was so. So was even Jesus Christ, though he was not the God himself, but he said, I'm the son of the God. Even then, he is described to be very beautiful. And so was Lord Jagatbandhu Sundar. He was so beautiful, then even a glance at him, a short glance for a fraction of a second, could mesmerize people. And that's why and there was always, a divine halo around him. So what Prabhu used to do is, he used to always cover himself up with a white cloth and move on the road. Whenever he was going somewhere outside of his cottage, wherever he lived, he used to always cover himself totally, except for the part of the face, of course. He used to cover himself totally and move. Because of that, if people used to get even a small glance of his body, a part of his body, they used to get mesmerized. They couldn't move after that. They used to, used to become like a statue, for some time, 15 minutes, half an hour. Even not only ordinary people, the great saints. At that time when Prabhu was in Navadvip, there used to be a very great saint who was worshipped in Navadvip that time as the greatest of all the saints who lived there, Bada Babaji Mahasaya. He once had a glance of Prabhu and became totally mesmerized. And for some time he couldn't move. And later he said that Prabhu is Lord Gauranga himself. Likewise, Vijay Krishna Goswami and so many of the saints who Prabhu was much, much younger to them compared. That time he was a young boy of 16 or 17 years. But when these great saints of so much elder than Prabhu is to look at him, even for a second, they used to get mesmerized. They to go into a trance, samadhi, So such was his Prabhu's, beauty and divine halo and radiance around. So that itself, we don't have much time now to shows that he was the physical form of Prabhu was so beautiful. Even a picture, when Dr. Mahanamrata Brahmachari, you all have heard about him by now, by whose name we run this class. When Dr. Mahanamrata Brahmachari came to USA long time back in 1933, for the first time he was staying in the house of a professor in Chicago, a philosophy professor. He didn't know Prabhu at all. He didn't have any background about Prabhu. But just by looking at the picture of Prabhu, Mahanamrataji was carrying a picture of Prabhu with him. He said, Brahmachari, you tell that your Prabhu is God himself. Simply by looking at his picture, I can understand that. I have heard Jesus Christ was so beautiful, but I never got a picture of him. But by looking at the picture of Prabhu, I can understand that he is God himself. And you know what he did? He made copies, several copies of that picture of Prabhu and gave it to all his students and told them that you keep this picture in your house and you meditate in front of him. He used to teach meditation to the people in his class. He said, you meditate on this picture because, meditating on nothing is very difficult. So he said, meditate on him as God. Look at this. He was a professor of philosophy of USA, didn't know anything about Prabhu, but just by looking at his picture, he says that Prabhu is nothing but God himself. We can look at another picture of Prabhu. That was the younger Prabhu, and look at this. When Prabhu used to be in Mahabhav Samadhi, enjoying the bliss. You have heard in the last class that Prabhu was towards the end, last phase of his Leela. He used to be in a trance always. For 16.5 years, he didn't come out of his house. So for that period of time, at that time, Prabhu was like this, mostly meditating and used to be in the Mahabhav Samadhi all the time. So you can see how beautiful he was at that time. Though this is the impression of an artist, but this has been drawn from picture which was available at that time of Prabhu. So such was his beauty, such was his physical form. This is what is called Sat part of the Lord when he arrives, advents on this mundane world. And what is Chit? We said Sat Chit Anand. Chit means intellect, or rather a higher part of intellect called consciousness, self-consciousness. That is the highest part of intellect. So the self-consciousness is Chit. That means when the God arrives on this world, that consciousness that he is God himself, that is the self-consciousness of the Lord. Our self-consciousness is to know that we are the servant of the Lord, or we are a small part of that Paramatma, or the divine soul. Our souls are the small part of the divine soul, which is creating this whole world. Similarly, when the Lord arrives here in a physical form, his self-consciousness is to know that he is the Lord himself. And this God consciousness was in Prabhu all the time. It was not so in Lord Gauranga. It is to come in him at times when he used to be in trance. In Lord Krishna also, when he spoke about Gita, gave the knowledge of Gita to Arjuna, that time he was in his God consciousness, fullest God consciousness, but not all the time. But in Prabhu Jagatbandhu Sundar, we have seen most of the time. At times he was like a devotee, that is to teach other people. But the moment you ask him a question or about who he is, who he was, what was his self, he will immediately answer you from this perspective of God consciousness. Even as a small child, when he was a small child, he had this concept. So we'll get into his life now and we'll see how this God consciousness was there in him when he was even a small child. You see this picture, this is the picture of a place called Dahapara, a small village where Prabhu arrived 150 years back, right? And this is the picture drawn of his father, Dinanath Nayaratna, who was a very big scholar of Sanskrit, erudite scholar of that time. This is a picture of his mother, Bama Sundari. She was a very kind-hearted woman and also educated. In that village around, everybody, every family used to depend on her whenever there used to be a problem. She used to help them. Now, we'll little bit get into the details of because this particular class is on the occasion of the holy arrival of Prabhu in this earth. So we will get into the detail of how he arrived in this world. And that itself shows that he was the Lord. Prabhu always said himself to all his devotees that I am Ajoni Sambhav. It means in English that I have not come out of a mother's womb. I was not conceived. He used to tell one of his devotees called Gopal Mitra, who was again much older than Prabhu. Most of his devotees, his ardent devotees, were much, much older than him. Prabhu was worshipped as a god when he was aged 15, 16, 17 years, 19 years. From that time onwards, all the people around him used to worship him as God himself. Such was his presence. Nobody had to talk to him to believe that he was a god. Just by looking at him, people used to think, oh, Lord Gauranga has come. Oh, Lord Krishna has come. Such was his presence. Such was his aura. Such was the radiance around. You didn't talk to him. And when he used to speak, it was like, people who have heard him, they've described, it was like honey, a flow of honey coming out of his mouth. So beautiful and so pacifying was the words. He used to speak very little, 1 or 2 words or 3 words, or maybe, 10 sentences in a whole day. But that used to be fabulous. Totally, hearing him was totally out of the world experience, people used to say. And in Kirtan, all that, we'll come to that later. So, Prabhu used to say that I am Ajani Sambhav. I have not come out of a mother's womb. So how was that? We'll hear that story. His father and mother, whom we believe to be his father and mother, they were, on this particular day, Sita Navami, when he arrived, they were in the local Jamindar's house, local, king's house. There was a festival, and he being a scholar and a Brahmin, he was called there. for performing the rituals. And at night, they were given a room, separate room to stay there. And early morning, they were to go back to their own house, which was on the other side of, which was on the bank of the Ganga River. Both this, the house of Dinanath Nairatna and Bama Devi and the Jamindar's house. So after all these ceremonies and rituals, at night they were sleeping, and Bama Devi suddenly saw a divine dream. She saw that both she and her husband, Dinanath Nairatno, they are meditating on the bank of the river Ganga. And suddenly, when they were meditating, a big lotus flower came floating on the Ganges and stopped in front of them. And when Bama Devi looked into this is dream, right? This is not actually happening. She's dreaming. Inside the lotus flower, she saw a beautiful child. And the child's, the color, the luster was like a molten gold and a glow like the, like the full moon, glow of a full moon, like that, a radiant glow was coming out of his body. And immediately Bama Devi got attracted and told Dinanath to get that child to her. And he got into the river, took the child in his hand and gave it to Bama Devi, Bama Sundari. And the moment she received the child in her hand, the dream ended. She suddenly became awake. And she got up, and the dream was so vivid in her mind. She immediately told Dinanath Nairatna was sleeping. So Bama Devi immediately made him awake and told him about the whole, the story which she dreamed. And both of them, suddenly they became, they were not in their self. They were in a trance and they started walking towards their house. They didn't know what they were doing. They were in a divine trance, and they started walking. They left the palace of the Jamindar, of that king, and they started walking towards their own house. They didn't know why, but they were just moving. They were just moving. And then when they came into their house and they went into their room where they worship, where their deity was there, they were the worshipper of Radha Govinda. They suddenly found a divine child inside that room, that worship room. And immediately Bama Devi recognized, this is the same child which I have seen in my dream. It's the same child. And she took him in her hands, both of them. And this is Lord Jagatbandhu. Later, he was named as Jagatbandhu. So this is how he arrived in this world. So that's why Prabhu said, I'm Ajani Sambhav. I have not come out of a mother's womb. Today, there's not much time, but later if I get some time, I'll also discuss that even as per Bhagavatam, the 10th canto of Bhagavatam, where arrival of Lord Krishna into this world is described, it is very, very clear that he is not also come out of Devaki's womb. Lord Krishna is also Ajanisam. And likewise, Lord Gauranga also. This can be proved, but now today, that is not the topic of discussion, so we'll not get into that. So we come to know that Prabhu Jagatbandhu Sundar arrived in this world miraculously. No one knows how he came. So he was a divine child. And that is the first proof that he was God himself. This Ajani Sambhavatva, or God, whenever the Supreme Lord comes, he never comes out of a human body. So, though he takes up a form, but not out of a human body, this is one of the most important characters of the arrival of the Lord, and that was fully there in Lord Jagatbandhu. So that is the first proof. I don't know how much I'll be able to continue because the time is short. So whatever the Lord allowed, we'll savor that much of his life here, but let's see how far we can go. And then he was growing up. This is the picture where the divine child was suddenly found by Bama Devi and the Nanatnaya Ratna. And then what happened? A few days after the Lord's arrival into their house, suddenly one ascetic saint from Nepal, he came looking into, he had a vision that Lord has arrived, and he came into this house and took the child, asked for the child and took the child in his hand. And then he asked for the exact time of his advent. And he was a astrologer also. So, he, by astrology, he found out, and he said, this child must be the Lord himself. And he took the child's, feet, and he worshipped his feet himself. Dinanath Rayanath was totally astonished. He was telling the saint, don't do this, don't do this. Because you should put your feet on the child's head. Why are you doing this? This will harm my child. But the ascetic won't listen. He told at that time Dinanath Nairatna that your child, this kid which you have, will one day become the greatest saint of the world, and he'll be the savior of the whole world. And then a little bit sad story. When Prabhu Jagatbandhu was only 14 months old, not even 2 years, just 1 year, 2 months, he lost his mother. Bama Sundari Devi left for the heavenly abode. And then Prabhu's aunt, elder aunt, whom we call in Bengali Jethima, she took over, and Prabhu was sent to her, who, she used to live in a different village in fact, near Faridpur, Bangladesh. Dahapara is in today's West Bengal, That time, the whole of it was Bengal, but at that time, they were living near Faridpur, a place near Faridpur. So Prabhu was sent there. And Prabhu started growing up in their house. Prabhu had a sister also, Kailash Kamini. Both of them, you can see, were sent there. After a few years, within a short while, that elder aunt of Prabhu also left the world. And again, Prabhu was alone, without a mother. Then, this aunt of Prabhu's had a elder daughter who was much elder compared to Prabhu and Prabhu's sister. She took over as almost a mother. and looked after Prabhu till Prabhu was much elder. And in fact, she was there. Her name is Digambari Devi. Even after Prabhu went into that great Mahasamadhi stance, when he, at the age of 50 years. Till that time, Digambari Devi was there, and she used to live in Paritpur Sri Angan itself. Even our Gurudev, Dr. Mahanamrit Brahmachari, also has seen her and was very much loved by her when he came to USA. Before that, she used to love him very much. And now you can see young Prabhu, he's growing up, and when he couldn't even speak, he used to say, Hai, Hai. He couldn't even speak Hari, but with that, usually people start speaking with the word like Ma and Baba, mother, father, Papa, and all that. But Prabhu started speaking with Hai. I mean, when he couldn't speak even, he used to say Hari, Hari all the time. And at that small age itself, he was given a small mridangam, and you can see with all his friends to do kirtan, Harinam. He couldn't speak properly, but at that age itself, they used to do kirtan, Hare Krishna and all that. And he used to sing Jaga Madha Papi Chilo Harinam. That means there is to be Jaga and Madha who attained salvation by the grace of Lord Gauranga. All this, small lines of the kirtans they used to sing. God knows who taught them all this. At that time, they were not going out anywhere outside the house, but how he came to know all these kirtans and these lines of the kirtans is still a mystery. And like all other normal child, he had a lot of childhood pranks. He used to go and sleep in the cremation ground or get into the boat and, flow down the river. All these childhood pranks were like a normal child were there in him also. And at the age of 6, there was this writing ceremony where he was initiated to learning by the Brahmin, and his father at that time came and stayed with him for quite a long time. And then his father, Dinanath Nayaratna, went back to Dahapada. Prabhu was here in Bangladesh, Faridpur, near Faridpur. Then a mysterious thing happened. Suddenly, Prabhu started crying. At that young age, he was 6 years old, 6 or 7 years old at that time. He started crying and nobody knew why. He won't explain. For 3 days continuously, he was crying. Then after some time, news came from Dahapada that Prabhu's father expired. And when people recalculated back, they said exactly on that day when Prabhu started crying, his father expired. So, such was his miraculous power at that age to know what has happened. And at the age of, I think, 12 or 13, he was given the thread, the thread ceremony was performed and he was given that sacred thread. And from that time onwards, a total change came in Prabhu. He became suddenly he grew up and became a very strict, like an ascetic, that he took that vow of celibacy, brahmacharya, and living a very strict life of a brahmachari. He used to cook himself, do all the worshippings as per the prescription given in the scriptures is to sleep at night on the floor on a, chatai or something, spreading a simple bamboo made bedspread, and used to sleep on the floor. And he never used to, up from that time onwards, live inside a room where other people have slept. Total celibacy, self-restraint, and isolation he used to maintain from that time. The total change happened to him. At the same time, but he used to be totally immersed in Harinam. And the Brajaras, that is, the love for Lord Krishna by Radharani and her Sakhis were enjoyed by him all the time through kirtans. At this time, when this thread ceremony was being performed, that day, a very unusual thing happened. Prabhu had a, friend who is to be called at that time Nichu, Nistarani Devi, her full name was. Prabhu used to call her Nichu, childhood friend, And when this thread ceremony was being performed, there were a lot of works in the house, usually a lot of guests are called and a lot of rituals that we performed. So they were all busy, and this Nistarani Devi or Nichu was doing some work under the guidance of Digambari Devi, who was in charge of the household at that time. Suddenly Prabhu from his room, that day he was, that is the ritual that the person who will be given the thread will stay separately in a room. So from his room, he called Nistarani Devi, Nichu, please come here. And then Nistarani Devi said, look, I'm very busy. I've been given some work, so I cannot come. I'll come later. And Prabhu said, look, whatever you are doing is all unimportant. You come to me and listen to what I say, because that is of importance. Then suddenly Nistarani Devi came and asked, who are you? Because he was a childhood friend. So he said, who are you that I should listen to you? Because the elders have told me to do so many things. Why should I listen to you? Then suddenly, all this time, Prabhu was talking to her as a friend only. But when she asked her, who are you? Suddenly, the total mood of Prabhu changed. He became very, very serious and answered in a grave tone, I am Lord Gauranga. In such a voice, he said that Nistarani Devi, she suddenly felt, what happened? This is not the Jagat I talk to. This is not my friend. Who is this? But then again she said, I don't believe. And then Prabhu again said very softly, you will come to know later. So you see, the point is, at that time, when he was 12, 13-year-old Prabhu, he knew, he was fully aware that he was Lord Gauranga himself. So such is God consciousness. That is Chit. We were talking about Sat Chit Ananda. So that is the Chit Shakti. That is the God consciousness. Fullest consciousness, always flowing, always there inside Prabhu. Even when he was a small child, when he grew up and became 20, 30, 40 years old, of course, it was always there. But when he was a small child, from that time onward, he knew that he is the Lord incarnate, the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Godhead. And as I said, From that time onwards, there was a total change. He was living the life of a celibate and doing Harinam with all his friends all the time. Lot of uh, all of his accompaniment, all his friends and companions. He used to impress them all with Harinam and make them do Harinam along with him. This is another, interesting story where again you will come to know about his God consciousness. So Prabhu had two elder brothers, that is cousin brothers, elder cousin brothers at that time, Tarini, Charan and someone else. So both of them got married. They were much elder to him. So they got married short time after his third ceremony. They got married. And the new sister-in-laws, who were also much older than Prabhu, they came to the house. So normally what happened, Digambari, we told Prabhu, look, your elder sister-in-laws have come. So you touch their feet and take their, take their ashirvad, touch their feet. That is a normal custom, in a Hindu society. So whenever the newly married comes to the house, the younger child, they will touch their feet. But Prabhu, he did a very unusual thing. He took a piece of bamboo stick and touched one end of the bamboo stick on the feet of these two ladies, and the other end of the bamboo stick he touched on his head. So he was so much conscious that he is Lord himself. That's why he didn't touch their feet. Or in other words, probably if he will touch their feet, it will not be good for them. Prabhu knew that. So he didn't touch their feet. In a tricky way, he avoided touching their feet, being fully conscious that since he is the Lord, worshipable by everyone, he can't touch feet of two ordinary women, which in turn may not be good for them. And at that time, Prabhu was also going to school like a normal child. And one day, Digambari Devi suddenly noticed a very strange thing. Usually in a typical Hindu society or Hindu house, it is a practice that before you go out of the house, there is the sacred tulsi, basil plant, always planted at the courtyard of the house. And before you go out, you are supposed to encircle the tulsi plant and then go. And when Prabhu was going round and round that basil plant, that time the shadow of the plant, the shadow usually static, remains at one side. But shadow of the plant was following Prabhu, following the footsteps of the Prabhu and rotating around. A very strange thing noticed by Digambari Devi. And listen, you all must know that all these were written by someone who has heard these things directly from Digambari. It is not a hearsay story, because she lived, she was even seen by Dr. Mahanam Brahmachari and the saints of earlier saints of Mahanam Sampradaya, Gopibandhu Brahmachari, who wrote this book about the life of Prabhu. And they heard all these things directly from Digambari Devi, who have seen all this. So these are not just mere stories, So Digambari Devi, and there were so many people who have seen Prabhu doing all this from his childhood, and all these facts, I shouldn't say stories, about Prabhu were collected and written in this book called Bandhu Leela Tarangani, where all this, the childhood stories of Prabhu and about his whole life is collected and depicted in several volumes. There are 10 volumes in which it is written. So this was a very strange thing noticed by Digambari Devi. At that time, Prabhu was also worshipping Radha Govinda of his house, his, household deity, that worship of Radha Govinda and the total seva of Radha Govinda, service to the Radha Govinda was taken over by Prabhu, and he was doing that in their house. And then he was sent for some time to Pabna, a place called Pabna, where another elder cousin sister of Prabhu, Galakmani Devi, was living. And there he spent quite a bit of time of his younger days there. And slowly he became so much engrossed in kirtans, and he used to have this, whenever he used to be in kirtan and or hearing at this devotional, dramas or songs, he used to get into samadhi or trance, and then doing Harinam around him for quite some time, he used to again come back to his normal self. This elder sister of Prabhu, Galakmuni Devi, one day, Prabhu is to, as I said, follow very strict brahmacharya or self-restraint at that time. And as a brahmachari, celibate monk, you are not supposed to use any cosmetic items on your body, not even oil. So at that time it was, winter, and Prabhu was not using any oil on his body or on his head for his hair. So one day, the sister of his, she said, "Look, why are you not using oil? And see, your skin, it has become so rough. It's winter time, you have to use some oil or some kind of a lotion or something like that on your body. It's not good." So she forced Prabhu, said, "I will massage oil on you." Prabhu was much younger to her. So she said, "I will massage oil on your body. Let us see who stops me." And as I said, Prabhu is to, always wrap around that white cloth all around his body. So she started opening up that cloth so that she can expose his, upper body and massage oil there. As she opened the front portion of that cloth, suddenly she saw a huge, spark, radiance coming out of the central portion of Prabhu's chest. And she couldn't visualize or understand what it is. She suddenly fainted. And then Prabhu slowly, touched her and brought her back to her normal self. And then she asked, "What is this, Jagat? What was there I saw on your chest?" Then Prabhu said, "That is why, Didi, I don't allow anyone to open my cloth, this cloth around my body. This is called Bhrigupada Chinna. You know, there's a story that Lord Vishnu, Mahavishnu, he has this, I'm not getting into that detailed story because that is another chapter altogether. He has this Bhrigupada Chinna, that is the, the mark of Bhrigu. Bhrigu is another great saint on his chest. So, by this story, we come to know that Prabhu is Lord Mahavishnu himself, or the Supreme God. This was seen by, again, Prabhu's another elder sister, Golakmani Devi.
Joy Jagatbandhu uncle, I think we're sort of running out of time, although I'd love to hear it. If you want to sort of just wrap up without delaying the class.
Okay. Okay. And, likewise, we can see that this God, as we get into his life, year after year, we'll see this God consciousness always present in him. And all the people who came around him experienced that he was the Supreme Lord himself. And another part of another major part is this Ananda. Ananda or bliss is a very important character of the Lord, which was there in Prabhu all the time. This Ananda or bliss means God himself is full of bliss or Ananda. And he cannot tolerate anyone who is not in bliss. Whenever he sees unhappiness somewhere, he always tries to remove that. And this is called grace or karuna, by which the Lord has given salvation, given total change in lifestyle to a lot of communities, the downtrodden communities, like the domes, like the Buna Bhagdis, who were untouchables at that time. No one in the society even used to go near them. There, Lord Jagatbandhu, because he was the Lord himself, he couldn't tolerate their sorrow, their, unhappiness. So he went down to their quarters, to their places where they lived, and elevated them by Harinam, giving them Harinam, totally changed their life and given them salvation, given them a total change in their lifestyle. Probably, that part, that the Ananda part of Prabhu Jagatbandhu, we will be able to hear it some other time if I get some time again to talk to you all. Because his life is so big, it is not possible to cover it in one day. But okay, maybe we have done some part of it, and in the next or some other time, whenever we get time, I'll talk about the rest of his life. Okay, thank you.
Let me thank Jyotirmoy Babu profusely, because it is something he did a tremendous job in terms of conveying to us in a passionate way the divine life of Prabhu Jagatbandhu Sundar. At least for me, I have not heard a rendering of this kind before. So for me, it was a great experience.